Hi.
How you doing?
Good. You?
Good.
Good.
I'm here today because I want to find out about the birds and the bees.
The birds and the bees.
Yes, indeed. Specifically...
They're all dying from pesticides.
That's what I hear.
Yeah.
Well, really, I want to know about celibacy.
About
celibacy.
Celibacy, okay.
And what role does it play in our spiritual practice? And does physical pleasure, does that just reinforce our attachment to the body? And we're not the body, right?
I am.
Okay. So what am I supposed to do?
Well, first of all, I really, from my experience, you know, in India and around the world, and meeting so many teachers, celibacy is a very difficult thing, especially for Westerners. That energy has to be dealt with somehow. You can't suppress it. If you suppress it, it goes this way, it makes you crazy, it makes you do crazy things. The Catholic Church and all the stuff that went on in there with the priests and everything, it's all because they don't deal with it. They try to suppress it, and then they have to hide it, and they develop a big shadow, a big dark side, which pushes them around. So sexual energy has to be dealt with one way or the other. For most of us, it doesn't make sense to try to be celibate. I know people who have been celibate, and it just was kind of natural to them. They didn't really struggle with it. Me, on the other hand, when I was in India with Maharaji, I was celibate for 2.5 years. He kind of, being with him, having him to concentrate on was helpful. But emotionally, I was a wreck. You know, I was crazy. I was going through all kinds of weird shit. And so, one time, he had named me Krishna Das. So then I had this whole nervous breakdown. It's in the book there, that you have right there. And so that had kind of passed, and I was out in the jungle one day and near the temple, and I just started to freak out. So I ran into the temple, and I ran up to his room. And I said, Maharaji, how am I going to get through this thing? And he goes, Bajrang Bali. You're Bajrang Bali. Bajrang Bali is the name of Hanuman. Yeah. And it's a very forceful, powerful aspect of, masculine form of Hanuman, very powerful. And also Hanuman was celibate, they say. So I said, and he was always teasing me about getting married. He would say, oh, Krishna Das will get married, he'll be happy when he was married, and I just like avoid the whole thing and hoping that it would pass, right? So he said, okay, you're Bajrang Bali. And he said, what's your name? I said, Krishna Das. Nay, Bajrang Bali. What's your name? Krishna Das. Nay, Bajrang Bali. I said, okay, you want me to be Bajrang Bali? You know Hanuman was the eternal celibate. And he cracked up. He laughed so hard. He's slapping his knee. Ah, you know. And he said, okay, you'll be Janaka, King Janaka. He was a Raja Rishi. He was an enlightened sage, an enlightened king. You'll be Janaka. You'll have yoga and bhog. Bhog is worldly enjoyments. Yoga is yoga. So, but the story about Janaka is very interesting. Narada, who was a celestial musician, used to go around causing problems everywhere. So he comes to Vishnu and he says, you know, who's your greatest devotee, huh? Who's your greatest devotee? And Vishnu says, oh, Janaka. What? He says, go check it out. So Narada flies over there and he sees Janaka lying, surrounded by his harem. He has his arm around one wife. He has grabbing another woman's breast, and they're all lying there, passed out after a night of pleasure. And Narada goes back to Vishnu and says, you're joking, right? You know, I was... Vishnu says, go look again. So he flies over again, and he sees, he's got his arm around one of his wives holding a breast. The other arm has kind of fallen into the fire. The idea, pleasure and pain are the same, are not different. So what we need to know is, what we need to work on and try to understand is, why do we want to be celibate? What does that mean to us? Do we think we're going to avoid a world of pain and unhappiness by not engaging that way with people?
Well, with me, let's just say sex is like chocolate cake.
Mm-hmm.
I go my whole time working on my practices, my chanting,
Mm-hmm.
not even think about chocolate cake.
Mm-hmm.
Have a slice of chocolate cake, my mental peace is gone for 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no.
I won't go back for seconds.
My mental peace has been gone for 30 years. Well,
That was
you're
good chocolate
lucky.
cake. Let's have more.
Yeah.
Let's have some whipped cream on that chocolate cake. You
Yeah,
know?
very good.
How do I deal with the fallout, shall we say?
What fallout?
It just disrupts my my peace of mind. It creates craving.
The craving is already there. Your craving for that peace of mind is no different than craving for the sex. You're holding on to some fantasy you have about what it's going to feel like when you do have peace of mind, but you don't have peace of mind. You're trying to hold on to some state of consciousness that you think is better than some other state. It's not like that. It's not like that. You can learn a lot from engaging with people sexually and emotionally. You can learn a lot about yourself. And relationships are real difficult. We can learn a lot from them that we can't learn any other way. You can't. If you were meant to be living in a cave, you know, you'd already be there.
Right.
My Indian father, who was a great yogi, and he had sworn as a young man, or even a teenager, to be celibate and not to have a family because his mother and father had died when he was young, and he was raised by an aunt who died when he was still young, and he just decided that's not for me. He used to do these yogic exercises. He used to tie himself up and take cold baths all day long. The guy had so much juice he could have impregnated the whole fucking world.
Good for him.
So, what did he say to me? He said one day, and finally Maharaji got him married. He forced him to get married. And he says to me, my boy, he says, I didn't have samadhi for the first time until after I was married. So, what the issue here is how you feel about yourself when you're engaging in either one of these activities. Both of those feelings are good to notice and try to see what's going on there. I don't think there's an issue. There's nothing wrong with sex. If there was something wrong with sex, how would we have gotten here in the first place? Is this a mistake? Somebody had sex to get you here and somebody had sex to get me here. Was that a mistake? Was that evil?
No.
You know? Of course not. It's human. You're human, I'm human, we're all human, mostly. Maharaji had children. He had a family. But he transcended that whole level of stuff. Naturally, it wasn't a pushing away. And in fact, he had left home as a boy at about 8 years old, after being betrothed to a village girl. They get engaged very young, and then by 12 or 13, they're married, making kids already.
Wow.
So he ran away after that and was living in the jungle, and he was found by somebody who told his father. His father came and brought him home. He was already a yogi, and he brought him home, and he married the girl, and they lived together for years, and they had 3 children. And he was really home a lot until his youngest child, his daughter, went off to school when she was about 16 or 17. But for all those years, he was home, living in the family, doing those things, and yet he was completely in God all the time.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of self-judgment that we do. We think we're qualified to evaluate ourselves. You know, who qualified us for that? We're completely crazy. We have no idea who we are, what we're doing. We should recognize that. And you shouldn't try to hold on to peace of mind. It's not about peace of mind. It's not about stopping thoughts. It's about achieving a state where thoughts no longer arise naturally. And to do that, you have to go through life fully. And the places you're afraid of, sooner or later, we have to deal with those places. And if we get lost, we get lost. Where could you go? You just think you're lost. And it's our thoughts that cause us the suffering. It's not real, but it feels like suffering when you're unhappy in this, and you long for this. When you have this, you long for that. So the only way you can resolve all that is to really try to be kind to yourself. give yourself some break. Give yourself a break. You know, where are you going? What do you want from life? You want to be happy like everybody else. If you were happy over here, this would never arise. And if you were happy over here, this would never arise. There's not happiness in either one of those things. The happiness is in here when it arises. And it doesn't come from clinging or pushing anything away. That's where our stuff is. If we think this is better and this is worse, or this is higher, or this is lower. The path, you're the path. Your life is your path. There's no map for that. And those people, and if you look around at some of these teachers who claim to be this and that, and then they're fucking everybody in, you know, behind the curtains, it's bullshit. You can't push that stuff away. You can only embrace it and see where it takes you. And see what it brings up in you, because that's your work. The feelings that you know, and then you think this is better? It's not. It's not, that's not natural. That's like, you're pushing this like another drug. It's no different than that. But to get awareness and to be able to be present with what's ever happening, that's the key. So you get lost in this, and then the craving dies down because you know, you've been fucking your brains out for 3 days. So then you go back to this. And then this, you get to here, and then this is obviously not enough, or you wouldn't go back there. You know, it's okay. So do this, put them together and see what happens. You can't, it's not so easy. But that's where the real thing is, when you're no longer judging or evaluating or have all these models of what's holy and what's sacred, you know. You know, it's, the real saints are very earthy, very, very earthy. They're funny, they're sweet, they're down to earth. They've done it all. Maybe they're not doing it this life, but they've done it all.
Been there. Yeah.
Been there, done that. They know what it is. They're no longer trying to squeeze water from a stone. You're squeezing water from a stone over here, and you're squeezing it over here, and you can't get water from a stone. You know, so, yeah, take it easy. You know, don't give yourself such a hard time. It's not so hard and fast, you know. And as you go through these things, you start to see why you have these programs. And then you have to kind of look at yourself and say, okay, this is a program that's running, yeah, okay. I grew up this way. I can see why I'm like that. You know, I have the theory that we see ourselves the way our parents saw themselves, not the way they saw us. That's part of it. Mostly, we have absorbed the way our parents lived in the world, the way they saw themselves. That's how we feel about ourselves. So we have a combination of my mother was this way, my father was this way. The environment I grew up in was a certain kind of way. I kind of adopted this way of getting through it alive. And maybe I don't need that program like that anymore. You know, I'm not 8 anymore. A lot of those programs are still running from when we were kids, and we think that's reasonable.
They're obsolete.
Yeah, and they're really obsolete. But it's not like you can push a button to stop them. You can't. But you can notice them, and you can notice what you avoid and why you avoid it, and try to be honest. You know, it's very hard to be honest with ourselves. A lot of times when we're being honest with ourselves, we're actually just evaluating ourselves in another slightly different way.
With a self-judgment.
Yeah. That's the only thing that has to go. You have nothing to worry about if we're putting ourselves down all the time. That's the thing. We're the ones who are closing ourselves down because of our self-loathing and our self-judgment and our self-hatred, our self-limiting. And that's just more ego too. There's nothing good about that. There's nothing inherently bad about this or inherently good about that. You know, it's our own minds that make it that way. And then it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, well, I feel better over here. You don't think that when you're fucking your brains out. You think, I feel better right here. But then that energy is dispersed, and you know, maybe it's this energy that's dispersed, that's unreal, and you're really more natural over here.
Yeah, right.
But you won't let yourself think that because we have a different, this is holy and this is spiritual and this is not. It's really not that way. It's just us humans trying to get through the day as best we can. And honesty with ourselves is the key. How can we be honest with anybody else if we're hiding from ourselves? Practice, but the ability to be honest with ourselves and the ability to release these things and live in a good way comes from practice. It's not about getting a particular state of mind and holding on to it for dear life. It's about constantly releasing whatever's got us caught and doing practice regularly so that we train ourselves to keep releasing. Release those thoughts over here. This is me. I don't like this, but I'm doing it. This is me. I like this. I think this is good. I'm doing good. It's not really that way. It's not really that way. You never know. At some point, I think being celibate for all those years in my life was actually good. I've probably been celibate for a good part of 6 years in my early life. Before the age of 28, I was probably celibate for about 6 years. That was interesting. I mean, I don't know.
6 years in a row?
2.5 years in India, and then 2.5 years, maybe 3 years in another situation. It really taught me a lot. It showed me a lot about myself that I don't even know if I could express it in words right now, but it was all out of fear. All of it was fear. All of it was fear. I was afraid. I hated myself. I didn't want to be judged. I was afraid to open to a woman. I just felt that, they would see who I really am and they wouldn't like me and, it would be terrible. I'd be rejected again and again, So I made that story up and it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It just kept reoccurring in my life because I was seeing it. So taking that time off, for me, might have been useful. Might have been. I don't know, but it certainly was what it was. It kind of made me go at 150 miles an hour in the other direction.
Okay, believe it.
So, but I don't know. It's just, life's an experiment. You got to find out what works for you. But certainly don't take anybody's word for anything, especially somebody who tells you to be celibate or say, this is the only way, you have to do this, The real teachers don't ask you to do that, as far as I can tell. The real teachers are much more relaxed about the whole thing, and they have a sense of humor about the whole thing, which is what we need when it comes to our own lives. There I go again. So yeah. Yeah. Practice, Whatever you're doing, try to do a little practice regularly, because it's from that getting used to the feeling of letting go, releasing and just being here. Whether you're repeating the name of Ram or you're watching your breath or doing something, getting used to that feeling will then call you. It becomes a more natural way to be in the world as time goes on, regardless of what you're doing. Whether you have 10 girlfriends or no girlfriends, and one has to learn how to be who one really is. And it's not one state or another, it's all of it. Being here, whatever arises. So if you're pushing anything away, it's the same as clinging to it. It's no different. They say the great way is not difficult for those with no preferences. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Next. So that's where we're headed. We have preferences because we cling to pleasure and we push suffering and unhappy things away. So we have preferences and things we like and things we don't like. But the more practice we do, we notice that logic doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. It's always a temporary thing. You were here when you were doing that, and you were here when you're doing that, and you're here when you're not doing either. So we have to learn to live in that. Only through regular practice over time does that start to manifest in our lives. It changes the way we see ourselves. It changes the way we see the world from inside out, not from here. So, good luck.
Thanks. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Nice. It's actually really nice.
Good.
Yeah.
All right.
Good.
Thank you.
Nice to
Thank
meet
you,
you.
my friend.